Moses and the burning bush, the unjust judge. Two stories emphasizing that nothing is ever as simple as it appears to be on God's holy ground. The cries of the vulnerable and the oppressed continue to be heard by God. The call for justice awakens the heart of the most unlikely people in the most unlikely of places. Seeds of justice and persistent hope are being scattered, and they are growing out of the cracks like the tenacious and resilient dandelion.
We met a Jewish father grieving the loss of his precious daughter. A suicide bomber took the lives of young people waiting at a bus stop outside the gates of a military base. It was the weekend. The father heard of the attack on the news. Nervously, he called his daughter's cell phone, and she never answered. At the same meeting, we met a young Muslim widow. She had waited with her 3 daughters for her husband so they could go to the beach, but he never arrived. Nothing was on the news. She finally learned a surprise military checkpoint had caused traffic to back up, and her doctor husband had left his vehicle thinking the cause might be an accident. A nervous military police shot him, and he was refused medical assistance and died. The persistent Muslim widow extends God's embracing love to a grieving Jewish father, and together they stand on holy ground. They speak out against injustice. A crack has opened in the security wall.
Listen! Pay attention! God calls us to solidarity, humility, and peacemaking.
What do you see when you call out my name from the doorway at 6 o'clock in the morning? You tell me this is my home, but I know it's not. Do you see a person frail in body, mind, and spirit? Someone who grieves because he has buried his lifelong partner and knows he's next? Do you have any idea of the wisdom I have gained over the years, or what meant so much to me in my life? Do you see someone who loved the sweet smell of freshly mowed grass? You might think I am enjoying having my meals made for me, but I loved cooking for my family. What meaning does today offer me now that I am no longer in control of much of my life? Holy ground in the world of long-term care, an unexpected place of experiencing the mystery of life. Just recently, I felt the draw to persevere in inviting an elderly resident, one who had been resistant to getting out of bed for day after day, to come to the New Year's Eve party with me. I watched him relive past memories as his toe began to tap and his hands came together at the sound of the music, as he sipped not one glass of champagne, but 2. As he rose up out of his wheelchair to shuffle dance with me to a very familiar tune. 1 week later, I sat vigil with his family as he transitioned through life into his hope of God's persistent love and life beyond death. This is the sacred space of holy ground in the present time of everyday living.
Listen. Pay attention. God calls us to draw on the virtues of love, respect, trustworthiness, as we walk with some of the most vulnerable among us.
For all the skills and organizing and empowerment that Venezuelan people have developed at the grassroots level, still the city poor are pressed down by the weight of urban and economic systems. So, in the poor neighborhoods of Caracas, as in the poor neighborhoods of Winnipeg, I saw persistent survivors, like persistent weeds between the cracks of concrete, finding ways to get what they need against all odds. Against systems and economic powers built for neither love nor justice. I was amazed and touched by their tenacity, by their faith, although they wouldn't call it that. Will justice come quickly? Justice for whom? And who decides what is justice? Will justice come quickly? That is not in our control. We only know that God is with us through the change of heart and life that will bring us into justice, getting our feet back onto holy ground, and standing in solidarity with the land and all its people.
Listen. Pay attention. God calls us to patient endurance through faith and through hope.
During my time at the Young Offender Center, I soon learned that many of the young offenders are First Nations, from families who are cemented by systems that perpetuate cycles of poverty and oppression in a society that keeps them on the margins. These young people are unwilling or unable to share their stories, perhaps because so many suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Until one day, their silence is unlocked through the medium of rap, that contemporary poetry music that allows them to spit their laments. Their stories break my heart as they reveal lives of desperation as young people trying with great difficulty to provide for their basic needs for survival, acceptance, love, and purpose. There are signs of hope. More and more marginalized people, young people, and their communities are rising up and leading the charge for change by challenging the status quo, proudly reclaiming their stolen culture and choosing good paths for themselves. I stand in solidarity with them. I will promote restorative justice over retributive justice.
Listen. Pay attention. God calls us to the long-haul work of reconciliation, building bridges with First Nations people and honoring covenants made.
He was just a shepherd, doing what shepherds usually do when God called him by name. Moses, the plea of Israel's children has now come to me, and I have seen how they have been oppressed. So go, I'm sending you back to Egypt as my messenger to the Pharaoh. I want you to gather my people, the children of Israel, and bring them out of Egypt. 10 times Moses took God's message to the Pharaoh. 10 times the Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go. Then, for some reason, after the 11th message, the Pharaoh finally said yes. Persistence, it seems, pays off. She was a widow in a land where women had few rights, and a widow had even fewer. She went to the judge over and over again to protest the treatment that she had received. But the judge didn't care. Not about her, not about the opinion of other people, and certainly not about what God might think of the situation. But the widow's persistence wore the judge down. The judge finally gave her a hearing, and she got the justice she deserved, but only because she was such a nuisance to him.
Listen. Pay attention. God calls us to persistence in our work for justice, maybe even to be a nuisance.
The cries of the vulnerable and the oppressed continue to be heard by God. The call for justice is awakened in the hearts of the most unlikely people in the most unlikely places. Seeds of justice and persistent hope are being scattered, and they are growing out of the cracks like the tenacious and resilient dandelion. May it be so.